Episode 134. Mrs. Weasley nodded. She was very white. She rounded on Ron, Hermione, and Bill as though they were being noisy and hissed, "Did you hear? He needs quiet!" "Headmaster," said Madame Pomfrey, staring at the great black dog that was serious, "may I ask what—" "This dog will remain with Harry for a while," said Dumbledore simply. "I assure you he is extremely well trained. Harry, I will wait while you get into bed." Harry felt an inexpressible sense of gratitude to Dumbledore for asking the others not to question him. It wasn't as though he didn't want them there, but the thought of explaining it all over again, the idea of reliving it one more time, was more than he could stand. "I will be back to see you as soon as I have met with Fudge, Harry," said Dumbledore. "I would like you to remain here tomorrow until I have spoken to the school." He left. As Madame Pomfrey led Harry to a nearby bed, he caught sight of the real Moody, lying motionless in a bed at the far end of the room. His wooden leg and magical eye were lying on the bedside table. "Is he okay?" Harry asked. "He'll be fine," said Madame Pomfrey, giving Harry some pajamas and pulling screens around him. He took off his robes, pulled on the pajamas, and got into bed. Ron, Hermione, Bill, Mrs. Weasley, and the black dog came around the screen and settled themselves in chairs on either side of him. Ron and Hermione were looking at him almost cautiously, as though scared of him. "I'm all right," he told them, "just tired." Mrs. Weasley's eyes filled with tears as she smoothed his bed covers unnecessarily. Madame Pomfrey, who had bustled off to her office, returned, holding a goblet and a small bottle of some purple potion. "You'll need to drink all of this, Harry," she said. "It is a potion for dreamless sleep." Harry took the goblet and drank a few mouthfuls. He felt himself becoming drowsy at once. Everything around him became hazy. The lamps around the hospital wing seemed to be winking at him in a friendly way through the screen around his bed. His body felt as though it was sinking deeper into the warmth of the feather mattress. Before he could finish the potion, before he could say another word, his exhaustion had carried him off into sleep. Harry woke up so warm, so very sleepy, that he didn't open his eyes, wanting to drop off again. The room was still dimly lit. He was sure it was still nighttime, and had a feeling that he couldn't have been asleep very long. Then he heard whispering around him. "They'll wake him if they don't shut up." "What are they shouting about? Nothing else can have happened, can it?" Harry opened his eyes blearily. Someone had removed his glasses. He could see the fuzzy outlines of Mrs. Weasley and Bill close by. Mrs. Weasley was on her feet. "That's Fudge's voice," she whispered, "and that's Minerva McGonagall, isn't it? But what are they arguing about?" Now Harry could hear them too. People shouting and running toward the hospital wing. "Regrettable, but all the same, Minerva," Cornelius Fudge was saying loudly. "You never should have brought it inside the castle," yelled Professor McGonagall. "When Dumbledore finds out—" Harry heard hospital doors burst open. Unnoticed by any of the people around his bed, all of whom were staring at the door as Bill pulled back the screens, Harry sat up and put his glasses back on. Fudge came striding up the ward. Professors McGonagall and Snape were at his heels. "Where's Dumbledore?" Fudge demanded of Mrs. Weasley. "He's not here," said Mrs. Weasley angrily. "This is a hospital wing, Minister. Don't you think you'd do better to—" But the door opened, and Dumbledore came sweeping up the ward. "What has happened?" said Dumbledore sharply, looking from Fudge to Professor McGonagall. "Why are you disturbing these people?" "Minerva, I'm surprised at you. I asked you to stand guard over Barty Crouch." "There is no need to stand guard over him any more, Dumbledore," she shrieked. "The Minister has seen to that." Harry had never seen Professor McGonagall lose control like this. There were angry blotches of colour in her cheeks. Her hands were balled into fists, and she was trembling with fury. "When we told Mr. Fudge that we had caught the Death Eater responsible for tonight's events," said Snape in a low voice, "he seemed to feel his personal safety was in question. He insisted on summoning a Dementor to accompany him into the castle. He brought it up to the office where Barty Crouch—" "I told him you would not agree, Dumbledore," stormed Professor McGonagall. "I told him you would never allow Dementors to set foot inside the castle, but—" "My dear woman," roared Fudge, who likewise looked angrier than Harry had ever seen him, "as Minister for Magic, it is my decision whether I wish to bring protection with me when interviewing a possibly dangerous—" But Professor McGonagall's voice drowned Fudge's. "The moment that thing entered the room," she screamed, pointing at Fudge, trembling all over, "it swooped down on Crouch and—" Harry felt a chill in his stomach as Professor McGonagall struggled to find words to describe what had happened. He did not need her to finish her sentence. He knew what the Dementor must have done. It had administered its fatal kiss to Barty Crouch. It had sucked his soul out through his mouth. He was worse than dead. "By all accounts, he is no loss," blustered Fudge. "It seems he has been responsible for several deaths." "But he cannot now give testimony, Cornelius," said Dumbledore. He was staring hard at Fudge, as though seeing him plainly for the first time. "He cannot give evidence about why he killed those people." "Why he killed them? Well, that's no mystery, is it?" blustered Fudge. "He was a raving lunatic. From what Minerva and Severus have told me, he seems to have thought he was doing it all on you-know-whose instructions." "Lord Voldemort was giving him instructions, Cornelius," Dumbledore said. "Those people's deaths were mere byproducts of a plan to restore Voldemort to full strength again. The plan succeeded. Voldemort has been restored to his body." Fudge looked as though someone had just swung a heavy weight into his face. Dazed and blinking, he stared back at Dumbledore as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just heard. He began to splutter, still goggling at Dumbledore. "You know who returned? Preposterous! Come now, Dumbledore." "As Minerva and Severus have doubtless told you," said Dumbledore, "we heard Barty Crouch confess, under the influence of Veritaseron. He told us how he was smuggled out of Azkaban, and how Voldemort, learning of his continued existence from Bertha Jorkins, went to free him from his father, and used him to capture Harry. The plan worked, I tell you. Crouch has helped Voldemort to return." "See here, Dumbledore," said Fudge, and Harry was astonished to see a slight smile dawning on his face. You can't seriously believe that you-know-who back? Come now. Certainly, Crouch may have believed himself to be acting upon you-know-whose orders, but to take the word of a lunatic like that, Dumbledore—" "When Harry touched the Triwizard Cup tonight, he was transported straight to Voldemort," said Dumbledore steadily. "He witnessed Lord Voldemort's rebirth. I will explain it all to you if you will step up to my office.